Welcome to Algebra, lesson number 1, Terms and Terminology. So this lesson and this unit is about algebra, and really as far as we're concerned, algebra deals with the introduction of one of the big concepts when we're dealing with math as it gets more abstract, and that concept is variables. And by way of a definition, we have one of these right here in our notes, so let's just highlight this. We're talking about a variable. And a variable is any symbol that stands in for a numerical value that hasn't been revealed yet. And when we're talking about variables in the context of math in general, variables could have one and only one right value, or they could have an infinite number of values. So there's really a range for the number of values that a variable could have. And that's sort of introduction. And typically when we're talking about variables in math, we put a letter in there. And that's what we're going to be using a lot of in the course of this unit. Our variables are going to be letters, anything from A all the way up to Z. So let's start with some terminology. Here is our first term, 7h squared. So let's look at some of the different vocabulary we have here. First piece of vocabulary is, again, a repetition of the word variable. So in this term, 7h to the exponent 5, our variable piece is right here. This is the variable. That's the letter. That's the sort of stand-in for a numerical value that we don't know yet. So that's a variable. And again, as I said, it's usually going to be a letter. If we go to our second bit of terminology, this is going to be the word, this is going to be the word coefficient. And a coefficient is the number that's in front of any variable. So in this example with 7h to the exponent 5, our coefficient is right here, the number 7. This is the number piece, coefficient. There we go. Last bit of terminology we're going to explore today is, or I guess the second last, is exponent. And an exponent, it has a particular mathematical role, but all we need to know at this moment is it's the number that's above and sort of raised above and kind of behind the variable, or in some cases a number. So if we're looking for something that's sort of lifted up above the other parts of our term, that's going to be our exponent. And in this example, 7h to the exponent 5, this is our exponent over here, the 5 that's kind of hanging up there in the air like you can see. So that is 7h to the exponent 5. We have a coefficient, followed by our variable, followed by our exponent. The last bit of terminology I want to go over is one that I'm going to be using, but we're not really going to spend a lot of time employing it, and that is term. And a term is a combination of numbers and variables that are being multiplied together. So this whole thing right here, this whole entity, 7h to the exponent 5, this whole thing represents one term. And that's some of the terminology we're going to use to start our unit on algebra. So let's go try some examples here together. Example number 1, we're going to state the variable, coefficient, and exponent for the following terms. So there's a term, minus 2x or negative 2x. So let's get variable, put that down, coefficient, I'll put that down, and exponent. Put that down as well. So in this particular question, negative 2x, here we have a variable. The variable, of course, is going to be the letter. So there is our variable right there. Our variable is going to be x. The coefficient, that's going to be the number in front of our variable. And in this example, minus 2 is going to be our coefficient. Now our exponent, we don't actually see an exponent up above our variable this time, but this is a nice teachable moment. Anytime you don't see a variable up above or an exponent rather, up above a variable, it actually does have one. It's just invisible and we don't write it usually, but that is going to be the exponent 1. And that's what we're going to put here in our little chart that we made for ourselves. So with the term minus 2x, our variable is x, our coefficient is minus or negative 2, and our exponent is 1. Let's have a look at the next example. Y to the exponent 5. So let's do the same thing. We are looking for a variable, a coefficient, and the exponent. So let's start with the variable. Variable, as we decided or read above, is the letter. And the letter we have here in this term is going to be y. Now the coefficient, again, there doesn't appear to be one, and you're tempted to say there is no coefficient, but there is a coefficient. Again, if we don't bother to write it down, because mathematicians, they can be an efficient lot, the coefficient in front of a term that doesn't have another number out front is going to be 1. So the coefficient of y to the exponent 5 is actually 1 y to the exponent 5. So we're going to put a 1 in there as our coefficient. And our exponent, sitting up there, raised sort of above and behind the variable, is going to be 5 in this example. So again, for that term, y to the exponent 5, our variable is y, our coefficient is 1, and our exponent is 5. So there's a couple of worked examples for you. Let's let you guys try a couple on your own here. So our first example A, minus 4a to the exponent 3. Let's try to get the coefficient, variable, and exponent written down. When you've got them down, come on back and we'll see how you did. Okay, let's have a look at this. Again, we're looking for variable, coefficient, and exponent. The variable, of course, is the letter, and in this term, a is our variable. Our coefficient is the number in front of the term, in this case, -4. And our exponent, the number that's sort of raised up and behind the variable, is going to be 3. Hopefully you got the same answer. Let's move on to example B. Now, this one's a little bit tricky. So what I'd like you to do is to hit pause, give this one a try, and come on back. We'll check how you did. Okay, let's get a look at this. Again, we're looking for our variable, our coefficient, and our exponent. So our variable, that's the more straightforward one. That's the one that's a letter. There's our letter B in this term. Now our coefficient, if you recall, if you don't see a coefficient out front, it's going to be a 1, and I'll write that in there. So that is actually 1b. Again, we just don't bother to write it, because if there's any b there at all, there must be at least one of them. So mathies, because they're very efficient, they're just not going to bother to write the 1. It's implied. We are going to write it explicitly, though, as our coefficient. So our coefficient is going to be 1, and our exponent, same thing. If there's a variable there at all, it has to be raised to the exponent 1. That's the bare minimum if we see a b there at all. So again, I'm going to write that in as our exponent, both on the term and then in the little table that we've made here. So we have in the term b, our variable is b, our coefficient is 1, and our exponent is 1. And that takes us to the end of lesson 1. Hopefully these concepts were already familiar to you, and good luck on the worksheet, and we'll see you in lesson number 2.